So today we're working in language arts, or RLA language arts, and we'll be working with pronouns. So last time we sort of delved into this a little bit, which I was a little not real happy the fact that we did this lesson on avoiding shifts in person before we actually got a better understanding of how pronouns work. I thought, these two lessons probably should have been sort of inverted. But anyway, of course, pronouns are that part of speech. It's words that we use to replace nouns. So whether it's a person, place, thing, or idea, a pronoun will step in place of that. So we prevent repetition in our speech and in our written language, in our written word. For example, if I'm talking about Jessica and I don't have pronouns, I have to keep saying Jessica every time I talk about Jessica. So instead of saying she or her, depending on the usage. So that way we break up our language a little bit so it's not as repetitive. I don't have to keep saying somebody's, name over and over again, or referencing, if I'm talking about my sofa, I don't have to keep saying sofa. I can say it. Same idea. The problem, though, when we start looking at pronouns, is that we can kind of confuse the reader, particularly readers, when we use he, she, or it in what we're referencing, because we can kind of lose what we're talking about, and they're unsure. The reader might be unsure about, well, which her is it, or which it is it, or making sure that we're using the correct form. Is it a plural, or is it possessive? Things like that we need to also address. So this lesson will start getting into that. Let's go ahead and take a look. Well, there we go. Come on.
Hey there! Are you ready for a lesson on using pronouns? Sometimes a pronoun can seem clear to you, but it's not clear to your reader. This lesson will teach you about using the correct pronoun and having a clear antecedent.
And again, this is one of those things that's particular with writing. We will butcher pronouns in our conversational language because people have that context and are able to understand, who we're talking about or what we're talking about. And it's less confusing. But for a reader that doesn't always have that additional context, that's when it really becomes a problem. So we're all guilty of sort of misuse of pronouns from time to time.
Okay, so I was writing my very first essay for a college class. Yeah, that's right, dude. I started some college classes. I was seriously nervous. So I had my brother Jesse look it over. And you know what? I started making errors right at the beginning of the paper. Look at this sentence. President John F. Kennedy took office on January 20th, 1961. Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson and him won the popular vote by only 0.17%. It sounded okay to me, but there's a problem. Him is just the wrong pronoun. It's supposed to be he. Okay, that's not a big deal, right? But dude, it was just 2 days later that I texted Jesse. Jim and Diego got their papers back, and he got an A. Yep, you guessed it. Jesse was totally confused. What he was I talking about? Jim or Diego? So I figured I'd better start paying attention to pronouns. And I'm going to tell you all about what I learned.
Yeah, so that's exactly what we're talking about here. Sometimes it can cause a little more confusion when using pronouns. So you want to make sure that you are using the correct pronoun and just want to open that up before we switch here. We'll discuss different forms there after or before we get to our questions.
Okay, the first thing you want to pay attention to with pronouns is what part of speech they are. See, there are different pronouns depending on what you're describing, like I, you, he, she, it, we, and they. But those pronouns are just used when they're the subject of a clause. There are different pronouns that you use for objects of sentences or prepositional phrases. Me, you, him, her, it, us, and them. And there's a whole set of pronouns that you use to describe who or what owns something. Like you'd say, my pizza, your pizza, his pizza, her pizza, its pizza, our pizza, or their pizza. And if the thing that's owned doesn't come after the pronoun, then you'd say the pizza is mine, yours, his, hers, its, ours, or theirs. There's also something called reflexive pronouns that end in self. You use them to emphasize the subject or refer to the subject if the subject is also a pronoun. So you'd say something like, I found myself alone in the woods. He bought himself a new game. She lied to herself. Anna fixed the car herself. The thieves got themselves caught by bragging on Facebook. That's a lot of pronouns. There's a list of all of them in the resources.
Take
The
a look
trick
at those.
is knowing when to use the right one. Now, most of the time, the right pronoun just sounds right. It sounds weird to say, him is hungry. He is hungry sounds right. But one big exception is when the pronoun is in a group. Then it's easy to get confused about which pronoun is right. But there's an easy trick to figuring it out. Like, take a look at these sentences. Paula and I played Diablo 3. Paula and me played Diablo 3. Okay, which one is right? Here's the trick. Take off the other things in the group. Just cross out Paula and in both sentences. Now, which one sounds right? I played Diablo 3. Me played Diablo 3. Now it's a lot easier to tell that I is the right pronoun. Paula and I played Diablo 3. You get it?
And that is probably one of the easiest and most confused times that where we confuse our pronouns the most is when we're part of a group, or you're using them, along with the group, or adding, people or places or things.
I want to be a superhero. I'm gonna go to my.
Just like he says, the easiest way to make sure that you're using them correctly is remove the other people or things and just make that a very simple sentence. So this is a great example here of how you make sure that you're using the right pronoun. What he's talking about, right? Subject pronouns. So if the pronoun is the subject, you use a different form than you do if it's the object. Now, remember, subjects, particularly in simple sentences, come at the beginning of the sentence. So that's one way you're always going to make sure that you're using it the right way. So in this case, I played Diablo 3, right? That's, the subject pronoun, I, he, she, me. Or I'm sorry, I, he, she, or it. If it's an object, meaning that it's sort of receiving the action of the sentence, that's when it changes form to me. So typically if it's the beginning, just using that I and me idea. So I is going to be at the beginning because it's usually part of the subject. Me will be probably in the middle or towards the end.
Okay, dude, give it a try. Which pronoun in these sentences is incorrect?
So it says, Brett and I started a study group with Chico and Frank. Chico really helped Frank and I understand the material. he and Brett are both getting A's, but it'll probably be B's for Frank and me. So right there, reading it like that, it doesn't sound that bad, right? We don't, it kind of flows. You don't hear any real hiccups there that make you sort of, it's like, oh, that's really bad. But if I say, Chico really helped I understand the material, right? So that right away tells you, and you could do that with any of the I's in there, with any of the pronouns in there to check. So that first sentence, is that correct? Well, let's change that I to a me and see how that sounds. Me started a study group with Chico and Frank. Nope, that sounds bad. And then later, so he and Brett are both getting A's, but it'll probably be B's for Frank and I. So if I said he and Brett are both getting A's, but it'll probably be B's for I. No, that is incorrect. So the one we're looking for here is Chico really helped Frank and I. And as we talked about, who's the subject here? Chico is the subject of that sentence. Frank and me will be the object. Also, I don't know how strict they follow this here. I believe the rule is typically, so if you're the pronoun and the subject at the beginning of a sentence, the I comes last. So, like it says here, Brett and I. If it's the object and you're using me, the me would come first. So as far as I know, it should actually read Chico really helped me and Frank understand. But the incorrect pronoun for sure here is
Great
I.
job. You can tell that Chico really helped Frank and I is incorrect because Chico really helped I sounds wrong. The pronoun me is the correct object pronoun. It's used in an object of a sentence or in prepositional phrases.
All right, let's keep going here.
Now let's talk about antecedents. That's a word I only learned when I was learning about pronouns. It kind of sounds like ancestors, right? And ancestors are the people who came before you. That's how I remember that antecedents are the nouns that come before pronouns. They tell you what the pronoun means. When you talk about pronouns, you can say that the antecedent is the noun that the pronoun refers to, and the pronoun has to have the correct gender and number for the antecedent. Take a look at this sentence. Megan took more pie than she could eat. What does the word she mean? It means Megan, right? So Megan is the antecedent. Now, the pronoun has to match the antecedent in gender and number. Gender is whether it's male like he, female like she, or neutral like it. And number is whether it's singular or plural. You wouldn't say he if you meant a girl named Megan because it's the wrong gender, and you wouldn't say they if you meant a boy named Tom because it's the wrong number. He is masculine and they is plural. Usually, it's not a problem to match the right pronoun with the antecedent, but some words can cause problems. Look at these words. They're called indefinite pronouns, and these ones are singular. You know how you'd say, everybody is coming, or no one is here? You use the verb is because the pronoun is singular. That means you want to use a singular pronoun to refer to it too. That's fine with a word like everything. You wouldn't say everything has their price. You'd say everything has its price. But there's a problem with indefinite pronouns that are about people. See, it used to be that you'd always use the male pronoun like everyone has his own style. That's still correct, but people realized that was kind of sexist. But no one had a really great way to deal with it. It's becoming a lot more common to use they or their like this. Everyone has their own style. Mostly that's informal, though. In formal writing, it's better to say everyone has his or her own style. Some people alternate between her own style and his own style, but those solutions are sort of awkward. So I like to mix it up and try to get rid of the pronoun. Like maybe I'd say, everyone has a unique style. So some indefinite pronouns can be singular or plural, depending on what they mean. So you'd say, some of the kids are writing their essays. But you'd say, some of the drink that spilled is still in its glass. Pronouns follow the same rules as verbs for indefinite pronouns. You think you get it?
It sounds complicated, but that's just consider, are you talking about people or are you talking about objects? That's the one rule that you want to sort of make sure you know the difference there. So let's take a look at our next.
Which sentence has a pronoun error?
So is it most of the packages are on its shelves. All of the money is in its hiding place. None of the books are losing their covers. Is any of the tea still in its pitcher? So it's most of the packages are on its shelves. So the packages, that's our antecedent, right? That is that's the subject. Its is the pronoun. So its would be singular, right? It's talking about one thing, not multiple things, which would be packages.
Great job! This sentence has a pronoun error because packages is plural. The pronoun most should take a plural pronoun. The correct sentence is, most of the packages are on their shelves.
And that's, really the trick is just making sure that you can eliminate everything else in the sentence and make sure that you're focusing on, okay, this is the pronoun and I need it to match the antecedent. What is my antecedent? Is it gendered? Is it plural? And that will, eliminate a lot of the stress in trying to figure out, making sure that you have the correct pronoun.
There's one more thing to pay attention to, and that's whether it's clear to the reader what the pronoun is referring to. In other words, is the antecedent clear? One way an antecedent can be unclear is when there's more than one possible antecedent. Read this sentence. President Kennedy and Vice President Johnson were not always in agreement, but he once called his party mate a man of wisdom, strength, and peace. So, who called who a man of wisdom, strength, and peace? It's not clear, right? There are two possible antecedents for he and his. President Kennedy and Vice President Johnson. You've got to clear up that confusion in your writing. Like you might say, President Kennedy and Vice President Johnson were not always in agreement, but after Kennedy's death, Johnson called him a man of wisdom, strength, and peace. That's a lot clearer, right? The antecedent can also be unclear if it's not stated directly. Sometimes when I write, I know what I mean by a pronoun, but I never actually say it. That can be pretty confusing. Like, take a look at this sentence. The lake is frozen this time of year, and a lot of people ice skate. It should be fun. So, what does it mean? Maybe you sort of get the idea, but does it mean visiting the lake? Going ice skating? Other people ice skating? This sentence would be a lot clearer if you just said something like, visiting the lake should be fun. Just make sure that whenever you use a pronoun, it's clear what you mean. There are a couple of other kinds of pronouns to pay attention to. Relative pronouns like who, whom, which, this, that, these, and those. Yeah, those words are pronouns. I bet you didn't know that. And a lot of the time, what they refer to is unstated, or it's a longer, bigger idea. So you've got to make sure it's clear what they mean.
And, maybe you get some of this. A lot of times they're answering questions or asking questions. So who and whom, for example, very commonly get confused. Who is the subject. So you tend to use that at the beginning of a sentence. Whom is an object pronoun. So it's going to receive sort of the action.
Like I was driving and wanted Jesse to look at something on my phone. I tried to tell him my password, but I don't have all those numbers memorized, I just remembered the pattern you press. So I say, press 2, then 1, then the 2 numbers under that. Jesse was like, it doesn't work. I finally figured it out. He thought I meant the 2 numbers under 2 and 1 instead of the 2 numbers under 1. So because I said that instead of 1, he couldn't open my phone. Darn it. It just goes to show you how you need to have a clear antecedent with your pronouns, right?
All right, so let's give this one a shot here.
This sentence has an unclear pronoun. Which change best fixes the unclear pronoun?
So the sentence is Kelly's mother asked her to find her backpack. So you can see we have some confusion here. Whose backpack are we talking about? Is it Kelly's or her mother's, right? So we need to address that. And the correct answer here is Kelly's backpack was missing, so her mother asked Kelly to find it. You know, a lot of times it's going to be not a simple fix, you know, just moving a word or, you know, something like that. You may have to sort of change your syntax and change your sentence to make it clearer as far as, you know, who the pronouns are addressing. In this case, you know, Kelly's backpack was missing, so her mother asked Kelly to find it. So we eliminate that confusing her, right? And that
Great job.
keeps it
In the original
from
sentence, it's unclear whose backpack is missing. Is her referring to Kelly or Kelly's mother? This revision clarifies that Kelly's backpack is missing.
Yeah, and so, you know, these things can be a little tricky. They will sound, because you know what you're talking about, but you have to be careful whether
Nice job.
other people know what they're talking, you know, will understand. And a lot of times this is something that you'll have to catch in editing and proofreading. But before we do our practice questions here, I just wanted to take a quick look at the different types of pronouns and when they're used. So this is what I was talking about. You know, we talked about shifts in person yesterday or last week, but we haven't really discussed pronouns to any great degree yet. And this nice little table, first off, we have definitions here. So subject pronoun, right? Act as subjects of a clause. So it's replacing, you know, if I'm using I, me, he, she, whatever it is, it's replacing a, you know, either a proper noun or another noun. So like it has here, examples would be, we are hungry, are you going, or he is happy. So whether, you know, if I've already made it clear who I'm talking about, then, you know, I could say that. Or if, you know, the reader is clear on what the antecedent is and who we are referencing in that sentence, right? That's the idea. But the subject pronoun, you know, and again, you'll see typically at the beginning here, object pronouns, as I mentioned, act as direct or indirect object and are used in prepositional phrases. So the family is happy for you. Give that to me. John hugged her, right? Who is getting hugged? She's getting hugged, but it's the object. So it's John hugged her, right? And if I wanted to use a pronoun for John, it would be he. He hugged her. That would be the difference, right? Or if John was female, so if it was a Jeanette instead of John, she would be the pronoun. That's the subject pronoun. Hugged her. That's the object pronoun. Possessive adjectives are used with a noun to show possession, belonging to someone. So possessive adjectives, that is my book. Is our presentation done? His feet are cold. So, you know, that's describing the book or the presentation, right? Adjectives describe nouns. Possessive adjectives describes, you know, who the book belongs to. Possessive pronouns, right? So showing possession. are used without a noun to show possession. That book is mine. The next presentation is ours. This medicine is hers, right? So not a possessive adjective, but a possessive pronoun standing alone. And it depends on a lot of times where the pronoun and the noun are. So typically a possessive adjective is going to be before the noun that you're describing. Possessive pronouns often come after, most of the time come after. Reflexive intensive pronouns can refer to the subject. So remember, we usually have a pronoun ahead of that, right? That's why it's reflexive, like reflection, right? Mirroring the pronoun. I take care of myself. So that's when you use self attached to it. He found himself forgetting steps. And that's another way you can check, as far as whether or not it sounds correct, whether it makes sense. I take care of my, right? That doesn't make sense. He found him forgetting steps. Doesn't make sense. They injured them, right? Reflexive intensive pronouns, again, it's one of those things that you can tell by the way it sounds in the sentence. And then reflexive intensive pronouns can also emphasize the subject. So we did it ourselves. She made the mistake herself. Paul himself fixed the stairs. And again, it's just used for emphasis. You don't have to use the reflexive intensive pronouns in that way. We did it, right? That's all I need to say. She made the mistake. Paul fixed the stairs, right? So it's just adding emphasis on who did it. And it kind of sort of singles them out, right? So instead of making sure that they're not part of a group or you know exactly who did it. So Paul himself fixed the stairs. Again, that's sort of a style thing. You do not have to use those. So just recapping here, these different ideas. So subject pronouns, object pronouns, possessive adjectives, possessive pronouns, and reflexive intensive. Just now going back to the lesson we had last week on person, right? And shifts in person. So first person singular, right? I for subject, me for object, my for possessive, mine for possessive pronoun, myself for reflexive. And then second person, right? If you're directing, often used for commands. If you're directing your writing or your speech to someone in particular, so that second person, you is the subject. You is also the object. So there's no difference there. Possessive adjective is your, possessive pronoun is yours, and reflexive is yourself. Third person, right? So I use first person for I. I'm sorry, I is first person, you is second person, he, she, it would be third person. And we see that they break it up into gender, whether it's male, female, or neutral. So obviously he for male, masculine, she for female, feminine, and then it for neutral. And then the various options there. So he, him, his, himself. And I will put this up on Google Classroom. I really like this table. This really explains it well. And then same thing, she, her for, it doesn't change form for possessive adjective or object pronoun for female. And then hers for possessive pronoun, and reflexive is herself. I think you kind of see what's going on here. Just to, thinking about plurals, right? That's the only difference, and those become basically gender neutral. If you're talking about a group, particularly in the informal, we use they or their. If it's more formal, you'll want to separate that out. So his or her instead of they. And then we for first person, because you're included in that group. It's no longer just I, it's we. And second person stays the same, right? Because you're still just addressing, whether it's a group or an individual that's still directing towards one particular body. So it's you. Okay. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and take about 10 minutes to work through our practice questions here on pronouns. And I will stop sharing screen and pause the recording.